Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, Ben Cross.
And I'm our expert guide, Lauren Taylor.
And today, we are pointing our lens at a figure who basically split music history into a clear before and an after.
Oh, absolutely.
We're taking all that tie-dye mythology, the burning guitars, the whole pop culture icon thing, and just setting it aside.
Yeah, we really want to look at the raw source material today of a true phenomenon, which is Jimi Hendrix.
Right. And for you joining us, we've actually pulled together a really fascinating stack of documents for this deep dive.
We have. It's a wild mix. We've got an academic thesis from the City University of New York that looks at his stage presence through, ancient Dionysian symbolism.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. Plus, we've got his actual military records, an in-depth look at his disastrous first recording contract, historical accounts of his Toronto drug trial, and some really detailed breakdowns of his final hours.
So the mission for you listening is to basically extract the real mechanics of his life. Like, how does a kid from Seattle go from stealing cars to totally reinventing what the electric guitar can even do?
It's quite the jump.
Yeah. We want to trace that inception, navigate all the massive ups and downs and drama of his stardom, and understand his legacy to date.
So let's just start with those early days.
Yeah, let's do it.
The story kicks off in pretty severe poverty in Seattle, but there's this specific moment in 1961 that just abruptly changes his trajectory.
It's one of those bizarre historical pivots. So James Marshall Hendrix, he had this rebellious streak as a teenager.
Right.
And in 1961, he gets caught riding around in stolen cars in Seattle.
Not great.
No. And when he ends up in front of a judge, he's handed a very stark ultimatum. Basically, go to prison or enlist in the army.
Wow.
Yeah. So he chose the military and signed up on May 31st, 1961.
Which is just a wild image to process if you think about it. The ultimate counterculture icon, Jimi Hendrix, enlisting in the military.
Totally.
And not just any unit either. He was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division.
The Screaming Eagles.
Right, down at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. But looking through his military records, it becomes pretty clear he was not cut out for the infantry.
Far from it. The military documentation paints this incredibly vivid, almost comical picture of Private Hendrix.
He really does.
Like, he was a terrible marksman. They constantly found him sleeping on duty.
Yeah, he needed constant supervision just to do basic chores.
Exactly. And the root cause of all this disciplinary trouble was his guitar.
He simply could not stop playing it.
You can just imagine the scene in the barracks, right?
Yeah.
You have these exhausted paratroopers trying to get some sleep.
And there's this scrawny private sitting on his bunk, just endlessly noodling on a guitar into the early hours of the morning.
Which obviously infuriated his fellow soldiers.
Oh, and it completely exasperated his commanding officer, a Captain Gilbert Batchman.
Right.
After just 1 year of what was supposed to be a 3-year enlistment, Batchman actually pushes for Hendrix's discharge.
He'd had enough.
Yeah. In his official report, Batchman noted that the military couldn't fix Hendrix's problems through counseling or hospitalization. The guy's mind was just so consumed by the guitar that he was practically non-functional as a soldier.
So they needed a way out.
Right, and an alleged ankle injury from a parachute jump basically gave them the bureaucratic excuse they needed to hand him an honorable discharge and just get him off the base.
So the military experiment ends, and he hits the road.
Right into the Chitlin circuit.
Yeah, grinding away as a sideman behind massive R&B legends. People like Little Richard and the Isley Brothers.
Which was a brutal touring schedule.
Oh, absolutely. But it forces him to develop his showmanship. Like playing the guitar with his teeth, playing it behind his head.
Just doing whatever it takes to get noticed behind the actual frontman.
Exactly. But it's also during this grind that he steps into a massive trap.
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking at the timeline of his early career, and there's this specific contract from October 15th, 1965, with a guy named Ed Chalpin.
That contract is infamous.
What actually happened there?
So Hendrix signed an agreement with Chalpin's company, PTX Enterprises. And the terms dictated that he was signing away 3 years of exclusive rights to produce, play, and sing for the company.
Cool.
In exchange, he received 1% of royalties and a grand total of $1.
Sweet. $1 for 3 years of exclusive rights.
Just $1. It was written in merely to satisfy the basic legal requirement that a contract has to involve the exchange of consideration.
That is wild.
It was a shockingly common predatory trap in the industry back then. It specifically targeted young, Naive, usually black musicians who were just desperate for a break.
They just signed whatever was put in front of them.
Exactly. And that single signature for $1 would go on to haunt Hendrix for the rest of his life.
Lawsuits everywhere.
Endless lawsuits the second he became a global superstar. It essentially forced him into a relentless touring schedule later on just to pay off all those legal settlements.
Man. But the real turning point, the actual metamorphosis, doesn't happen until he leaves the United States.
Fast forward to September 1966.
Right. Chase Chandler, the former bassist for the Animals, sees Hendrix playing in a small club in New York.
And he convinces him to fly to London.
Yeah. The British blues scene was huge at the time, but the reaction from the rock royalty over there to this totally unknown American is just staggering.
He completely upended the London scene almost overnight.
There's that brilliant anecdote from the saxophonist Mick Eve.
Oh, I love this one.
Right. He was standing out on the street outside a famous guitar shop on Denmark Street in London. And Chase Chandler runs out of the shop, grabs him, and says, "You've got to come inside and hear this bloke play."
And Mick Eve just stands there, listening to the sound, literally bleeding through the brick walls, and goes, "I don't need to go into the shop, Chaz. I can hear him from here."
The power was already breaking through the walls, and then he actually gets in front of the established guitar gods.
Yeah, he sits in on a jam session with Cream.
Wow.
And at this point, Eric Clapton is widely considered the untouchable zenith of electric guitar playing.
The absolute peak.
Hendrix plugs in, starts playing his frantic, hyperkinetic style, and Clapton is just floored.
Totally shocked.
He actually walked off the stage in the middle of the set, went backstage, and told Chandler, "You never told me he was that fucking good."
It's an incredible collision of history, too, when you look at where he lived.
Oh, the apartment.
Yeah. When Hendrix finally started making enough money to rent a flat in London, he moved into 22 Brook Street.
Which happens to be the exact same address where the legendary classical composer George Friedrich Handel lived centuries earlier.
And Hendrix loved that connection.
Yeah.
He went out, bought Handel's classical scores, and would just sit on his sofa jamming along to a composer who had lived in that exact same room 200 years prior.
Two complete masters of their respective genres, separated by centuries, sharing the same airspace.
It's poetic.
But Hendrix was absorbing all of this, right? The classical influences, the British blues, the sheer volume of those London amplifiers, and he's getting ready to bring it all back across the Atlantic.
Which brings us to the explosion, the massive ups, downs, and drama of his stardom.
Right.
He returns to the U.S. in 1967 for the Monterey Pop Festival, and he hits the culture like a meteor.
This is where that CUNY academic thesis comes into play. It analyzes this specific performance through a Dionysian lens.
So Dionysus was the ancient Greek god of wine, ecstasy, fertility, ritual madness.
Exactly. And the author of the thesis argues that Hendrix wasn't just performing songs at Monterey. He was channeling this ancient archetype of ecstatic frenzy.
Yeah.
The climax of that set is one of the most famous images in rock history. Hendrix sprays his Fender Stratocaster with lighter fluid, sets it on fire, smashes it to pieces, and throws the wreckage into the crowd.
And the thesis connects this act to the ancient Greek concept of sparagmos.
Right.
What does sparagmos actually mean in the context of a rock concert?
Well, in ancient Dionysian rituals, sparagmos was the act of tearing a living sacrifice apart limb from limb.
Intense.
Very. And the destruction of the sacrifice was believed to bring about the rebirth of the god.
Okay, I see.
So by ritually sacrificing his guitar, an instrument he deeply cherished in fire and violence, Hendrix was performing a modern musical sparagmos.
Destroying the object of his art to be metaphorically reborn.
Reborn as a transcendent cultural deity in his home country, the crowd was just utterly mesmerized by the sheer destruction and passion of it.
But the reality of being a cultural deity comes with a crushing level of scrutiny and pressure.
Definitely.
The narrative takes a very dark turn as we move into 1969. He's arguably the biggest rock star in the world, and he flies into Toronto International Airport in May of that year.
And customs agents search his luggage.
Yeah. They find suspected heroin and hashish hidden in his bags.
He's arrested on the spot and suddenly facing up to 20 years in a Canadian prison.
And the psychological toll of that arrest hanging over his head was immense. But his immediate reaction was surreal.
Yeah, he posts $10,000 bail and gets released just in time to make it to his sold-out show at Maple Leaf Gardens that same night.
And instead of hiding from the scandal, he just leaned right into it.
He really did.
He was joking with the crowd. And during his performance of Red House, he actually swapped out the lyrics to sing, "Soon as I get out of jail, I want to see her."
It's such a brazen move.
But he eventually has to return to Toronto to face the music in December 1969.
And looking at the courtroom transcripts, the defense strategy was a masterclass in deflection.
Because under Canadian law at the time, the Crown had to prove not just that the drugs were in his bags, but that Hendrix actually knew they were there.
Right. So his defense attorney, John O'Driscoll, built the entire case around a complete lack of knowledge.
He pointed out to the jury that Hendrix had no drug paraphernalia in his luggage whatsoever, and a physical examination showed no needle tracks on his arms.
And when Hendrix took the stand, his testimony was just brilliantly deadpan.
He explained that as a famous musician, fans were constantly throwing gifts at him or slipping things into his bags.
Yeah. When the prosecutor held up the vial found in his luggage, Hendrix testified he genuinely believed it was bromo seltzer.
Which was a perfectly legal over-the-counter stomach medicine?
Exactly. But the real climax of the trial came when the prosecutor held up the small aluminum tube that contained the hashish and demanded to know what Hendrix thought it was.
Hendrix looked at it and calmly said, "A pea shooter."
A pea shooter. The entire courtroom just erupted in laughter.
It completely deflated the tension of the prosecution's case.
It really did. Ultimately, the all-male jury deliberated and acquitted him of all charges.
Now, while we're on the subject of his legal troubles, the retrospectives in our source stack mention the broader political atmosphere of 1969.
Yes, the context is important here.
It noted that the FBI maintained a 7-page file on Hendrix. And there were theories circulating among musicians at the time that arrests like his and similar legal troubles facing John Lennon and the Rolling Stones were part of a coordinated government crackdown on counterculture figures.
Right. And just to be completely clear to you listening, we are simply reporting the historical context provided in the biographies.
Exactly. We aren't taking any political positions or endorsing these theories either way, but it underscores the intense paranoia of the era.
The paranoia and the pressure were absolutely real. And it bled directly into the stability of his band.
You mentioned earlier how that predatory $1 contract forced him into endless touring.
Yeah, that exhaustion, combined with the legal stress and heavy drug use, created a pressure cooker.
Just a few weeks after the initial Toronto arrest, the Jimi Hendrix Experience played the Denver Pop Festival in June 1969, and the band completely imploded.
The accounts of that Denver show sound almost apocalyptic.
Hendrix allegedly dropped a half-tab of acid right before walking on stage.
And outside the stadium, fans who couldn't get tickets were rioting, demanding to be let in for free.
So the police responded by firing tear gas into the crowds. The wind shifted, and the tear gas blew directly over the stadium walls and onto the stage,
literally choking the band while they were trying to play.
It was the breaking point.
The bassist, Noel Redding, was already deeply frustrated. Hendrix had developed this habit of inviting random musicians into the studio and onto the stage without consulting the rest of the trio.
So sitting in a dressing room, choking on tear gas, after months of relentless, exhausting touring, that was the final straw.
Redding quit the band that night and flew back to London, abruptly ending the original iconic Jimi Hendrix Experience.
Yet, through all of this chaos, the arrests, the riots, the bad contracts, he was still fundamentally rewriting the rules of music theory.
It's amazing he had the capacity for it.
Let's dig into the actual mechanics of his musical innovation, starting with what guitarists now universally refer to as the Hendrix chord.
If you want to understand his genius on a technical level, you have to look at this chord.
Right.
Technically, it's called a dominant 7-sharp-9 chord.
Okay.
It's the driving rhythmic engine behind massive hits like Foxy Lady and Purple Haze.
Yeah.
But in traditional classical harmony theory, this chord is highly problematic because it contains both a major third and a minor third played simultaneously.
Which, to the human ear, should sound like a mistake. It should clash violently.
It creates intense dissonance. But Hendrix didn't run from the dissonance. He amplified it.
He took a chord that was occasionally used in complex jazz arrangements and weaponized it with heavy distortion.
It perfectly captures that Dionysian tension we talked about earlier. It's volatile, angry, and aggressive, yet deeply magnetic and bluesy.
He proved that you could build mainstream rock anthems around complex, dissonant jazz harmony.
And speaking of weaponizing sound, we have to look at his performance at Woodstock in August 1969.
The imagery of Woodstock is usually all peace and love. But Hendrix closed the festival on Monday morning to a dwindling, exhausted crowd standing in the mud.
And his rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner is described in our sources as a masterclass in text painting.
Walk us through what he was actually doing with the instrument there.
So text painting is a musical technique where the sounds literally mimic the lyrics or the narrative subject matter.
Okay.
Henderson just played the notes of the national anthem. He used his guitar to recreate the literal, terrifying sounds of the Vietnam War. He used his whammy bar to simulate the sound of rockets glaring and bombs bursting. He created rhythmic feedback that sounded exactly like the heavy, chopping blades of military helicopters hovering over a jungle.
Michael Wadley, who directed the famous Woodstock documentary, noted that people in the crowd were literally tearing their hair out in shock.
They had never heard a physical instrument manipulated to sound like an active war zone.
He took a 155-year-old militaristic anthem and turned it into a psychedelic blues commentary on the terror of the era.
And he pushed those mechanical boundaries even further with his later work with the Band of Gypsies, particularly on the track Machine Gun.
He fundamentally changed how the guitar was physically played.
Right. Keep in mind, Hendrix was naturally left-handed, but he famously played a right-handed Fender Stratocaster flipped completely upside down.
How does that actually change the sound? Like, does it alter the mechanics of the guitar?
It changes everything. Because the guitar is flipped, the tension of the strings is completely altered.
Oh, I never thought of that.
Yeah, the lowest, heaviest string now has the longest length behind the nut, which changes its resonance and overtones.
Fascinating.
Furthermore, he strung the guitar with very light strings and tuned the entire instrument down a half step. This gave the strings an incredibly soft, almost rubbery action, allowing him to bend notes far beyond what a standard setup could handle.
He was also doing things with amplifier feedback that sound engineers at the time considered to be purely unwanted noise.
Sound engineers spent decades trying to eliminate feedback.
Right.
But Hendrix embraced it as a separate, living instrument. A reviewer for the New York Times watched him perform Machine Gun and described it as molding a living sculpture of sound.
A living sculpture.
He would find the exact physical spot on the stage where the amplifier frequencies would catch the strings, and he'd control that screaming, high-volume feedback using his thumb to mute unwanted overtones.
He elevated the electric guitar from a simple rhythm instrument to a fully dynamic electronic sound generator.
It's staggering to think about the level of innovation he achieved in such a compressed time frame.
Which brings us to the heaviest part of our deep dive, the final hours and the enduring mystery of his death.
The timeline takes us to September 18th, 1970 in London.
It is a profoundly tragic sequence of events.
Hendrix was spending his final days in London with a German painter and figure skater named Monika Dannemann.
And according to the biographies, he was in a very fragile state.
He was dealing with chronic insomnia, lingering insecurities about his music, and a deep, heavy disillusionment with the music industry and all its legal entanglements.
The timeline of those early morning hours is chaotic. But the fatal pivot point is that Hendrix ingested Monika Dannemann's prescribed sleeping medication, a drug called Vesparax.
Yes. Vesparax was a notoriously powerful, heavy-duty barbiturate.
What was the actual dosage he took compared to what a doctor would recommend?
The recommended dosage for a grown adult was half of one tablet.
Half of one tablet.
Hendrix took 9 of them.
My God.
He ingested exactly 18 times the recommended medical dose of a highly potent sedative.
Which leads to the morning of the 18th. At 11:18 a.m., Monika calls for an ambulance.
2 ambulance attendants, Reg Jones and John Sawa, arrived at the Samarkand Hotel just 9 minutes later at 11:27 a.m.
And the scene they found was grim.
The door to the flat was wide open, the room was dark, the gas fire was left on, and Hendrix was lying in bed, completely unresponsive.
He had choked on his own vomit while unconscious from the barbiturates.
They rushed him to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, but the resuscitation attempts were futile. The surgical registrar, John Bannister, officially pronounced Jimi Hendrix dead at 12:45 p.m.
He was just 27 years old.
The timeline seems straightforward on paper, but the inconsistencies surrounding that morning have fueled decades of intense debate and investigations.
The primary source of the lingering drama is Monika Dannemann herself.
Her accounts of that morning changed constantly over the years.
She gave wildly conflicting times for when she woke up, when she found him unresponsive, and what she did next.
Most notably, she frequently claimed in interviews that she rode in the back of the ambulance with Hendrix to the hospital.
But both paramedics, Red Jones and John Sawa, flatly denied this on the official record.
They stated that the flat was entirely empty except for Hendrix when they arrived, and absolutely no one rode in the ambulance with them.
Those shifting narratives eventually led to real legal consequences. In 1992, his former girlfriend, Kathy Etchingham, who inspired the song The Wind Cries Mary, actually pushed British authorities to reopen the investigation based on all these conflicting testimonies.
It was a serious push. It led to a formal 1993 inquiry by Scotland Yard.
Did they find anything definitive?
Investigators spent months re-interviewing witnesses and looking at the old medical reports. But ultimately, because over 2 decades had passed, the Attorney General decided there simply wasn't enough concrete evidence to proceed with any new charges or change the official record.
So the original coroner's ruling of an open verdict remained in place.
Right. That legal term simply means the coroner could not definitively determine whether the overdose was an intentional suicide or a tragic accident.
It leaves a permanent shadow of ambiguity over his final moments. But when you pull back and look at the entire scope of this deep dive, you start to see the real legacy.
For sure.
For you listening, the story of Jimi Hendrix is the ultimate masterclass in the collision of raw generational talent with relentless, crushing external pressure.
He was put through an absolute crucible.
He really was.
He navigated severe childhood poverty, an incredibly rigid military establishment that couldn't contain him, the racial and economic constraints of the 1960s Chitlin circuit,
A predatory music industry that literally bought him for $1.
the terrifying weight of a major drug trial, and the cultural turbulence of a country at war.
And despite being pushed through all of those meat grinders, he still managed to produce revolutionary art.
He fundamentally refused to be boxed in.
He wouldn't conform to the military, he wouldn't conform to traditional R&B backing roles, and he outright refused to accept the physical limits of what a piece of wood and 6 strings were supposed to do.
He embodied that Dionysian archetype to the very end.
He brought fire, ecstasy, and total innovation to the culture. But he was ultimately consumed by the sheer intensity of the forces that elevated him.
His legacy isn't just a catalog of great songs. He permanently expanded the vocabulary of modern music.
Which brings us to one final provocative thought from the source material for you to mull over.
On the very morning he died, Hendrix wrote a short poem on a piece of hotel stationery.
He titled it, The Story of Life.
The final stanza of that poem reads, "The story of life is quicker than the wink of an eye. The story of love is hello and goodbye. Until we meet again."
It's a haunting set of words.
When his close friend, the singer Eric Burdon, first found that poem in the apartment, he immediately interpreted it as a suicide note.
It read like a man making his final piece.
But Monica Danneman fiercely contested that, claiming Hendrix had given it to her and told her to keep it forever, insisting it was just a beautiful, poetic story about their relationship.
So we leave you with this question to ponder long after we sign off. Was that final poem a tragic, intentional goodbye from a man who knew the pressure had finally broken him?
Or was it simply the fleeting, beautiful musings of a Dionysian artist who was already looking forward to his next great metamorphosis?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep listening, and we'll catch you next time.